We'll be focusing on data ownership and privacy now. And we'll kick it off with a fireside chat between Marcel van der Heijden from Speed Invest and then our own colleague, Sebastian Laboudet. So I'd like to give you guys the stage.
Everyone, hi Marcel, can you hear us?
Are you there?
I think you're on mute.
We cannot hear you yet.
Thank you. What about now?
Yeah, it works. Awesome.
Perfect.
Can get started. So maybe very quickly. So I'm Sebastian from the ventures team of Plug and Play InsurTech. And so looking at finding exciting investment opportunities across Europe in the InsurTech scene. Maybe Marcel, you can give a very quick overview of what you do and some maybe investments that you've done in InsurTech and in data privacy space.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, by the way, Sebastian and the whole Plug and Play team. So I'm Marcel, my partner at Speed Invest. We are a pan-European early stage venture fund. Started in Vienna originally, Vienna and San Francisco, where we've had an office since we started in 2011. Right now we have offices in London, Munich, Berlin, somebody in Paris. And we invest all over Europe in seed stage companies. We manage 420 million, portfolio of 160 companies. So we've been pretty active and growing over the years. My background is I joined the company 8 years ago. I have a technical background and was a founder quite a while ago, end of the 90s, early 2000s. And been, before I joined Speed Invest and after kind of my endeavors as a founder, I was active in enterprise software and telecommunications. So that's kind of, I feel comfortable on the tech side, comfortable on the numbers side, and comfortable on the enterprise side. Within Speed Invest, I'm part of what we call our enterprise tech team, where we do quite a broad range of investments, but I've been historically pretty active around our InsurTech investments. And we've made a bunch of InsurTech investments, but specifically maybe to highlight here is WeFox, German-Swiss group, one of the European unicorns now, a company called Cyberite that I think was presenting previously, and a company called Amodo, which was actually also, like Cyberite, part of the Plug and Play program. And I used to engage quite a bit with Plug and Play and the partners around Plug and Play when I was living in Silicon Valley. So when I joined Speed Invest, I moved to Silicon Valley, was about there for 6 years. Now back in Europe for over 2 years. So pretty active on the InsurTech side, and I've made an investment in a privacy tech company called AirCloak about 3.5 years ago now. I think it was mid 2017. I've been tracking the space ever since. It's been the only investment we've made on the privacy tech space, but obviously there's a lot happening, and I still try to track what's going on. So that's kind of my personal background and background relevant to InsurTech and data privacy.
Awesome, thank you, Marcel, and we are really glad that you can join us today for this keynote.
Sure.
So maybe first question, is regulation the main driver for corporates adopting privacy enhancing technologies?
I guess it is. Well, I guess it was, and I think things have changed over time a little bit. When we invested in AirCloak, the regulation was definitely a big part of the investment thesis, and I think speaking with corporates, in that period and over the last years, I think it obviously still is a big reason why they're taking a close look at their data infrastructure, why they're taking a close look at some of the privacy tech solutions. I think, since, let's say, 2017, a couple of things have happened, most notably the Facebook Cambridge Analytica situation, let's say, and other data breaches. And there's just been a lot of press around how companies are treating or sometimes in some cases misusing personal data or consumer data. And I think that has resulted in an increase in awareness on the consumer side around, how their personal data is being used. And I think that has triggered some level of investment, maybe level of adoption, but certainly board level discussions around, how do organizations should treat their customer data, and what's kind of acceptable use and whatnot. So the regulation provides kind of an envelope around that, but I think there's other discussions around customer trust, retention, churn, loyalty that are part of it and maybe more important for corporates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in a way, the reputation, the data protection is now part of reputation conversation, which is linked to the brand image, but also this. Sorry,
yeah. Yeah, that's true, and I think if you get a slap on the wrist by the regulator, and I know that some companies see this as a calculated risk, right? They know the initial fine, and they know that it's going to buy them some time. If you lose the trust of your customers, that's much harder to recoup, let's say, and probably more expensive to do as well.
Absolutely. And so, how would you classify the main technology trends within privacy enhancing technology?
Well, I think there's a number of technology trends, and I'm not a deep expert here, but there's things like data masking, synthetic data, generative networks. Differential privacy has been around, has been adopted, homomorphic encryption, privacy preserving analytics, privacy preserving machine learning. So there's no shortage of technologies, and it's exciting to see people developing these and others adopting them. It doesn't feel to me like there's one single technology that's going to solve all the problems. I think solutions are still seem to be pretty use case and context dependent. What I've seen in terms of corporate adoption is actually less. I mean, I've seen some adoption of point solution for specific use cases, but I think in the last few years, organizations have really looked not necessarily at privacy technology per se, but more getting the underlying plumbing and the foundations in terms of their data infrastructure, getting that right. So understanding what data is out there, where is it stored, who actually uses it, who's allowed to use it, and how do I manage this? How do I set policies, and how do I manage all of this? I think the investments have been there. I think that's a good thing. You need to get that right before you can start to look at kind of higher level solutions in the stack. But trends, I mean, I'm personally most, scared or concerned about kind of deepfake trends, which, it's not really around personal data, but it touches on it, and it's not really around security, but it still touches on it, right? And it's, I think that's something that I don't think we really know how to deal with that. Also from a regulatory and a policy point of view. So lots going on still, lots of innovation happening still today.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make with the deepfake, where it actually extends our definition of privacy, where privacy now is not only about what you do, information about yourself, but what others can do with your own person, let's say, in a way. So
exactly.
It creates very interesting challenges.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I think your answer brings me perfectly to the next question, actually, which is, is it possible to build a business case where corporations can build ROI, so return on investment, on privacy enhancing technologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, certainly, thinking back a few years ago, this was not the case, right? I think organizations were looking at privacy tech as a cost factor, right? As a cost of doing business, an additional cost of doing business. So if you compare today to kind of pre-GDPR, let's say, period, clearly there's an incremental cost or an opportunity cost around, companies not being able to do with their data what they used to be able to do, or monetize their data the way they used to be able to monetize this. And this trend is continuing, right? If we look at iOS 14 and how Apple makes it really hard for publishers, for example, to track users and customers, you know, this opportunity cost continues to grow. You know, the other way to think about it is, okay, let's take the post-GDPR world as a baseline. Let's take as a baseline the world where, you know, there are clear limitations around how you can use personal data. Then you can look at it from a point of view, okay, you know, given these constraints, how do I optimize what I'm able to do with my data? Or how do I minimize the costs of doing that? But also, like, how do I do it better than my competitors? How do I create a competitive advantage by deploying a great data infrastructure, by deploying great processes, and by deploying, you know, the privacy technology solutions that I need to serve my customers better, or to operate more profitably? So, you know, I think it depends a little bit from your vantage point. And again, I think the kind of customer trust issue, you know, also plays a role here, but that's obviously a bit harder to quantify. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there's an element here of kind of risk management, you know, which is, there's always hard to build a kind of top line business case for risk management, right? It's always going to be more of a bottom line view.
Yeah, sort of long-term management. But I think there's also a case for, you know, the laws regulation like GDPR and PSD2 that sort of push some companies to actually start managing their data. Where, you know, they have data assets but that are poorly managed, poorly stored, or not in a compliant way to the new standards. And by going through this compliance process, they end up with the capabilities to actually manage, you know, leverage data in a compliant way, of course.
Yeah, they have to do that, and that can be. I can totally see it's a painful process for some companies, and even an existential threat.
And do you see a future where consumers can have full control over their personal data and can monetize it in their own?
Well, I mean, I think technically this is possible, right? I don't think there's any technical hurdles really. Whether this is feasible, I'm not so sure. So I think, you know, I don't even know that customers really want this, right? And I'm not a big, I'm a B2B investor, so I can't really predict consumer behavior or consumer needs very well. But if I look at myself, I have no interest in controlling and monetizing every little bit of my personal data. Like, I want to feel in control. I'm more than comfortable, you know, trusting third parties to do that on my behalf. And I want to have some level of control, but not in a lot of detail. You know, it's just not very interesting. I just don't have the time. But I think there's three things here, like, you know, to kind of optimize this. You need broad consumer awareness, customer awareness. I still don't think that's the case. I think it's definitely grown a lot, but I don't think there's a big enough market of consumers that want granular control over their data and or monetization possibilities of their personal data. So I think most people just use, you know, their social networks and whatnot, and they're happy with that without really thinking about the trade-off and the deal they're actually making in selling their personal data in exchange for a service. I think if you want to do that, you need to figure out what the user experience is. It has to be really, really, really slick. And I haven't seen it. I don't have a view what it would look like. I mean, if I go to Google, manage my privacy, it's a terrible experience, and there's a reason for that, right? It is, you know, the incentives, Google's incentives and my incentives from a privacy perspective are not aligned, right? There's no, Google has limited interest to give me a really good privacy, you know, personal data control user experience. And you know, other companies try, Apple, you know, helps me control how my personal data is being used. And this is a question of incentive alignment. Google makes a lot of money selling personal data, Apple doesn't. And so for Apple to push this through is a smart competitive move, but it also doesn't hurt them as much as it would hurt Google to do this. So aligning the incentives in the industry, I think, is really important. So consumer awareness, I don't think it's there, although I went off Facebook, friends of mine left WhatsApp, for these kind of personal data reasons, but those are total outliers. I think user experience, I don't think anybody's really tried it. And then the incentive alignments, I think there's interesting models to think of when it comes to micropayments. So, subscription models, but it's not really working at scale right now. Still advertising, meanings, users selling their personal data drives the bulk of the business and the bulk of the incentives.
Yeah, that's let's say that there's sort of consumer awareness of the risk, or at least of the fact that their data is used in a way that they don't really control. But I guess the understanding on what are actually the steps and what are the implications is very complex to sort of communicate.
Yeah, and I think the risks, I'm not sure if there's like big risks for consumers selling personal data in the sense, in the sense of risk when we think about cyber risk, right? I don't think, obviously there's data breaches, right? So you leave your login credentials with a service provider and they get breached, and those might hit the street. And if you're not smart in choosing your passwords, that can be a problem, of course. But I think for me, the biggest risk is almost like, you're being influenced in ways without you realizing it. You're going on Facebook, you're going on Twitter, you're going wherever you go, and you're being influenced through advertising and in very subtle ways. That you don't realize you're being influenced. So if you think about the US elections, you're being influenced in ways without you realizing it. And I think that's actually the biggest risk, but maybe more on a societal level.
Absolutely, yeah. There is a sort of misalignment sometimes between the companies that are using the data in some way and the consumer. That's probably where it is critical.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
All right, thanks a lot. We are slightly over time. I would still give a bit of space for questions in case anyone in the audience has questions.
Yeah, Sebastian, in the Q&A box, there's 2 questions.
Awesome. Okay, so first question is, Marcel, you mentioned PET is at the moment a cost factor for organizations. However, do you see consumer behavior changing to that type of feature?
Well, I'm not really seeing consumer behavior itself changing much. So I'm seeing consumer behavior changing as reflected in press, in coverage by magazines and articles and blogs. So in that sense, I see consumer behavior changing. I guess there's a few people that are leaving Facebook and similar platforms, but there's not a lot you can do in very direct terms as a consumer if you're unhappy with how your personal data is used. I mean, you can write letters to Facebook or Twitter or WhatsApp or whatnot. So I'm seeing it, but more when I look at it from a let's say journalism point of view. No.
It can be understood that it might be regulators' role actually to create the right areas and safeguard in the name of the consumer.
Yeah, I think that's what regulators want to do, So, but I also don't see a lot of consumers writing to their, national data protection officer, right? It's just not something you would do, but, I think it's more something that emerges on televisions and interviews, press picking up on general consumer sentiment. Let's say I think that's how it's reflected. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank
it was
you.
a pleasure to have you join our keynote and our event today. And
my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. So typically data ownership and privacy is not the sexiest topic, but you've made a very engaging chat for us. So it was thanks a lot.